At exactly midnight, Los Angeles didn't just welcome the new year. It exploded. The quiet hum of suburban streets vanished beneath a sudden storm of sound. Firecrackers rattling like machine gun fire, car horns blaring in rhythmic chaos, whistles screaming into the cold night air, and laughter echoing so loudly it bounced off concrete walls. Windows lit up one by one as confused neighbors rushed to their curtains, wondering if the city had lost its mind. Some thought it was an emergency. Others feared riots. A few even reached for their phones, ready to dial 911. But what they were witnessing wasn't violence or lawlessness. It was celebration. Raw, unfiltered, deeply cultural. For many Filipino families scattered across Los Angeles, midnight wasn't a quiet countdown followed by champagne. It was a tradition carried across oceans, generations old, erupting into American neighborhoods that had never seen anything like it. And while some residents were shocked, others were unknowingly standing at the edge of a cultural collision that would spark confusion, tension, laughter, and unexpected understanding. To understand why Los Angeles erupted that night, you have to understand what Bagong Taon truly means to Filipinos. In the Philippines, New Year's Eve isn't about silence or subtlety. It's about noise, energy, and driving away bad luck with everything you've got. The louder the celebration, the better the fortune believed to follow. Firecrackers crack open the sky. Pots and pans are banged together by children. Car horns blast in unison. Coins jingle in pockets to attract wealth. Round fruits pile high on tables, symbolizing prosperity. These traditions aren't casual habits. They are rituals passed down through hardship, colonization, poverty, and resilience. When Filipinos migrate, they don't leave these beliefs behind. They carry them like heirlooms. So when families in Los Angeles prepared for midnight, they weren't thinking about HOA rules or noise ordinances. They were thinking about grandparents back home, childhood memories, and the belief that how you welcome the year determines how it treats you. Los Angeles, with its sprawling diversity, has seen countless cultural celebrations, but even this city wasn't prepared for the intensity of Bagong Taon. In neighborhoods like Carson, Eagle Rock, Panorama City, and parts of Long Beach, Filipino households were already buzzing hours before midnight. Kitchens were alive with sizzling food. Children darted between rooms holding coins in their fists, and elders reminded everyone not to forget to jump at midnight to grow taller and invite luck. Outside, boxes of firecrackers sat ready. Some families had lived in the U.S. for decades, yet this night always pulled them back to their roots. As the countdown began, voices switched from English to Tagalog, Ilocano, Kapampangan, languages layered with excitement. And when the clock struck 12, restraint vanished. Noise poured into the streets like a flood. What felt normal and joyful to one household felt overwhelming and alarming to another just feet away. Across the street, an entirely different experience was unfolding. American families, some new homeowners, some retirees, some parents with sleeping children, jolted awake as if a war had begun outside. The sound didn't stop, it escalated. Fireworks lit up the sky in unpredictable bursts. Smoke drifted into yards. Dogs barked wildly. One man later recalled thinking, "This doesn't sound like celebration, it sounds like chaos." For many neighbors, New Year's Eve had always meant a quiet toast, maybe a televised countdown, and bed shortly after. This wasn't just unfamiliar, it felt invasive. Facebook neighborhood groups began lighting up with frantic posts. Is anyone else hearing this? Should we call the police? Is this even legal? In real time, misunderstanding brewed. What one culture saw as joy, another saw as disruption. And in that moment, Los Angeles became the stage for a clash not of people, but of perspectives. Police scanners crackled that night with calls pouring in from multiple districts. Noise complaints, fireworks reports, confused residents demanding answers. Officers were dispatched, some already bracing themselves for confrontation. But when patrol cars rolled slowly into these neighborhoods, what they found wasn't anger. It was celebration. Families gathered outside, laughing, filming on their phones, greeting officers with smiles. Some even waved. The contrast was surreal. One officer later described the scene as a block party multiplied by 10. Firecrackers popped at their feet while elders shouted blessings into the night. Kids danced around sparklers, unbothered by authority. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't defiance. It was tradition. Yet the law didn't always see it that way. Officers faced a dilemma: enforce noise and fireworks regulations, or navigate cultural sensitivity in real time. Each decision carried weight, and not all encounters ended peacefully. For Filipino parents, this night was about more than noise. It was about teaching identity. Many had grown up in the Philippines where Bagong Taon was sacred, even during times when money was scarce. They remembered using makeshift noisemakers, banging tin cans, laughing despite hardship. Now in America, they wanted their children to feel that same joy, that same connection to heritage. Some families had already adapted, using party poppers instead of illegal fireworks, celebrating indoors while still making noise. Others held tightly to tradition, feeling that toning it down meant losing something essential. In their eyes, America already asked for so much assimilation. This night felt like one moment where they could be unapologetically Filipino. But what happens when cultural pride collides with community rules? That question hovered heavily in the air as midnight stretched into the early morning hours. Not all reactions from neighbors were negative. Some residents stepped outside, curious rather than angry. They watched wide-eyed as families shared food, laughed loudly, and welcomed strangers into their celebration. A few even accepted plates of pancit and lumpia, confused but intrigued. One woman later said she'd lived next to Filipino neighbors for years but never truly understood their culture until that night. She admitted the noise startled her, but the warmth disarmed her. In those moments, barriers softened. Conversations happened. Explanations were shared. "We do this to scare away bad luck," someone explained, smiling. And suddenly the chaos made sense. What began as shock turned into curiosity. For some, Bagong Taon became a story they would retell, not as a complaint, but as a glimpse into a culture that celebrated life loudly because history had taught them survival demanded it. Still, not everyone found harmony. In some blocks, arguments broke out. Voices rose. Accusations flew. About respect, about rules, about how things are done here. Social media amplified these tensions, turning isolated moments into viral debates. Some posts framed the celebration as reckless. Others defended it passionately, accusing critics of cultural intolerance. The comment sections became battlegrounds, revealing deeper anxieties about immigration, belonging, and what it truly means to share space in a multicultural city. Bagong Taon was no longer just a celebration. It became a symbol. To some, it represented joy and resilience. To others, disorder and disregard. And beneath those opinions lay a bigger question. How do cultures coexist when traditions aren't quiet? As the smoke slowly cleared and dawn approached, the streets of Los Angeles bore evidence of the night before. Spent firecrackers, confetti, lingering smells of gunpowder and food. Some neighbors woke still annoyed, replaying the noise in their minds. Others woke smiling, replaying laughter. Filipino families cleaned up together, sharing coffee, joking about who jumped the highest at midnight. To them, the year had started right. The bad spirits had been chased away. Luck had been invited in loudly. But the memory of the night lingered far beyond sunrise. It lingered in conversations at work, in online forums, in city council discussions. Bagong Taon had made itself impossible to ignore. What happened at midnight in Los Angeles wasn't just about noise. It was about visibility. It was about a community refusing to shrink its traditions, even when misunderstood. It was about neighbors being forced to confront cultures they'd lived beside but never truly seen. And it was about America itself, constantly negotiating where celebration ends and disruption begins. Bagong Taon didn't shock the city because it was chaotic. It shocked the city because it was honest. Lojoy. Unfiltered heritage. A reminder that behind every sound is a story, and behind every tradition is a people determined not to disappear quietly. And as Los Angeles learned that night, sometimes the new year doesn't arrive softly. It announces itself whether you're ready or not. By morning, the celebration had left the streets, but it hadn't left the internet. Videos filmed on shaky phones began circulating before sunrise. Clips of non-stop firecrackers, entire blocks glowing red with sparks, neighbors shouting over the noise, police cruisers creeping through clouds of smoke. Some clips were posted with laughter and pride. Captions reading, "Only Filipinos welcome the new year like this." Others were uploaded in frustration, framed as proof that the city had spiraled out of control. Within hours, local pages and community forums were flooded. Comment sections quickly split into camps. One side called it reckless and dangerous. The other called it cultural ignorance to complain. The algorithm did what it always does. It amplified the most emotional reactions. Suddenly, Bagong Taon wasn't just a neighborhood issue. It was a city-wide debate, spilling into national conversations about immigrants, tradition, and who gets to celebrate loudly in America. News outlets soon caught wind of the viral clips. Headlines softened or sharpened the story depending on perspective. Some reports focused on fireworks violations and safety risks. Others highlighted the cultural roots of the celebration, interviewing Filipino elders who calmly explained why noise mattered. A grandmother spoke about growing up during hard times, when noise symbolized hope and survival. A young Filipino-American talked about straddling two worlds, wanting to honor tradition while fearing backlash. These interviews revealed something many viewers hadn't considered. For Filipinos, Bagong Taon wasn't just a party. It was a statement of endurance. And for many watching from outside the culture, it was the first time they'd heard that explanation. The story was no longer about chaos, it was about context. Inside Filipino households, reactions were mixed. Some felt proud seeing their culture discussed openly, even if controversially. Others felt uneasy, worried that the loud celebration reinforced stereotypes they'd spent years trying to escape. Parents asked themselves difficult questions. Are we helping our kids belong or making them targets? Teenagers scrolled through comments defending their families while reading insults from strangers who didn't know them. The pressure to choose between fitting in and standing out weighed heavily. Yet, many elders remained unfazed. They reminded the younger generation that every tradition worth keeping has faced resistance. Silence, they said, was never how Filipinos survived history. Noise was how they were remembered. City officials found themselves caught in the middle. On one hand, safety regulations were clear. Illegal fireworks posed real risks: fires, injuries, property damage. On the other hand, enforcement without understanding risked alienating an entire community. Some districts began discussing culturally informed outreach rather than punishment. Flyers were translated. Community leaders were consulted. The goal wasn't to erase Bagong Taon, but to reshape how it could exist responsibly in a dense urban setting. This shift didn't happen overnight, and not everyone agreed with it. But it marked a rare moment where tradition forced bureaucracy to listen. For non-Filipino neighbors, the days after the celebration became a time of reflection. Some still felt upset, but many began asking questions instead of making accusations. Why was the noise so important? Why did it feel celebratory instead of aggressive to those participating? A few neighbors admitted they'd never spoken to the Filipino families living next door, despite sharing walls for years. Bagong Taon, ironically, became the loud introduction no one had ever had. Curiosity replaced assumptions. Understanding replaced fear. Not everywhere, but in enough places to matter. One story stood out among the many shared online. A man who initially called the police later posted an update saying he regretted it. After speaking with his neighbors the next day, he realized they hadn't meant disrespect, they'd meant joy. They invited him in for leftovers and explained their traditions. "I still don't love the noise," he wrote, "but I understand it now." That post didn't go viral the way angry clips did, but it mattered. It represented what rarely trends: quiet understanding after loud misunderstanding. For Filipino Americans watching from other states, the Los Angeles story felt familiar. Similar scenes had played out in New Jersey, Nevada, Texas, wherever Filipinos had built communities. The comments were filled with recognition. "This happens every year where I live. We always get complaints too." It became clear this wasn't a Los Angeles problem. It was a Filipino diaspora experience. A shared tension between honoring roots and navigating rules in countries that value quiet order. And yet, despite the pushback, the celebration never disappeared. It adapted, endured. Bagong Taon forced a bigger conversation about how America defines normal. Fireworks on the 4th of July are expected, even when they're loud, dangerous, and disruptive. But when the noise comes from immigrants celebrating something unfamiliar, it's questioned. This contrast didn't go unnoticed. Many Filipinos pointed out the double standard, not with anger but with clarity. Celebration, they argued, is only acceptable when it fits the dominant culture. Everything else is labeled disturbance. Bagong Taon challenged that assumption, demanding equal space for different expressions of joy. As weeks passed, the intensity of the debate faded, but the memory didn't. Neighborhoods returned to routine. Streets quieted, yet something had shifted. Some families now warned neighbors ahead of time before New Year's Eve. Others organized community celebrations in designated areas. The chaos had sparked compromise. Not perfect but real. Bagong Taon had left its mark, not just in noise complaints, but in conversations that hadn't existed before. In the end, what shocked Los Angeles wasn't just the sound. It was the realization that cultures don't arrive quietly. They announce themselves, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes beautifully. Bagong Taon was never meant to offend. It was meant to protect, to invite luck, to honor ancestors who survived by being loud when silence meant erasure. And maybe that's the lesson the city was forced to hear. Understanding doesn't come from quiet observation. It comes from listening, even when the sound is overwhelming. Long after the headlines faded, Bagong Taon continued to echo in quieter ways. In Filipino homes, the celebration became a story told with laughter. About that night Los Angeles couldn't sleep. Parents recounted it to children as proof that their culture was alive, even thousands of miles from the Philippines. Elders smiled, saying it reminded them of home, of provinces where noise rolled through villages like thunder. What outsiders saw as chaos, they remembered as comfort. The night wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty, especially cultural honesty, often makes people uncomfortable before it brings understanding. For many second-generation Filipino Americans, that midnight eruption forced an internal reckoning. Growing up, they had learned to lower their voices, anglicize their names, and explain their food at school lunches. Bagong Taon reversed that instinct. It was impossible to be invisible when your culture announced itself at full volume. Some felt embarrassed at first. Others felt empowered. Many felt both. But for the first time, they saw their heritage command attention instead of apology. That shift mattered more than noise complaints ever could. Community leaders took note. Churches, Filipino associations, and cultural groups began organizing forums, not to suppress celebration but to guide it. Conversations about safety, legality, and mutual respect took place without shame. These weren't attempts to erase tradition, but to protect it from being misunderstood. The goal became coexistence, not compromise of identity. Bagong Taon was evolving, not fading. Los Angeles itself played a quiet role in the outcome. As a city built by immigrants, it has always struggled and succeeded in cycles of cultural collision. From mariachi bands to dragon dances, from street parades to night markets, the city has learned, slowly, that harmony doesn't mean uniformity. Bagong Taon joined that long list of traditions that initially startled, then eventually settled into the rhythm of the city. The shock was temporary. The contribution was permanent. Some neighbors who once complained now marked the date on their calendars, not to protest but to prepare. Earplugs, white noise machines, or simply a decision to leave town that night. Others chose curiosity instead, asking to be invited, asking questions, tasting food, learning why round fruits mattered, why coins were carried, why noise symbolized hope. Understanding didn't erase discomfort, but it softened it. Every culture has a sound. For some, it's silence. For others, it's prayer. For Filipinos on that one night, it's joy at full volume. Bagong Taon is not about rebellion. It's about renewal. It's about declaring loudly that survival deserves celebration. That the future should arrive to music, laughter, and fearless hope. And when that sound fills an American street, it doesn't erase anyone else's culture. It adds to the chorus. The chaos that shocked Los Angeles was never meant to divide, but to remind. To remind a city that multiculturalism isn't theoretical. It's lived. It's noisy. Sometimes inconvenient. But it's also deeply human. Bagong Taon revealed how close misunderstanding always is. And how close understanding can be, if people are willing to step outside instead of calling it in. Years from now, when the videos resurface, they won't just show firecrackers and flashing lights. They'll show a moment when a community refused to whisper its identity. When neighbors were forced to look beyond assumptions. When a tradition traveled across the Pacific and refused to be diluted. History isn't always written in books. Sometimes it's written in sound. And maybe that's why the night mattered so much. Because it asked an uncomfortable but necessary question. Who gets to be loud in America? Who gets to celebrate without explanation? Bagong Taon didn't answer that question, but it demanded it be asked. And in doing so, it pushed the conversation forward, even if only by a few steps. At the next midnight, the city would count down again. Some would toast quietly. Others would celebrate loudly. And somewhere in Los Angeles, firecrackers would still crack the air, coins would still jingle in pockets, and Filipino families would still believe that the future listens to how you welcome it. Because for them, hope isn't whispered. It's shouted into the night, unapologetically, joyfully, and together. Thanks for watching.